Are you feeling better? A little bit. Okay, if you don't feel well, just by all means, just leave, even if it's in the middle of it. Okay. All right. Now, going back, how do we perceive the self in a way which is impossible? What comes to mind? So you mentioned already, the self appears to exist separate, something separate from mind and body, as very concrete. So just how does the self seem to us, which is unrealistic? Use some of the words I've used, if you like. Anything you remember?
Intrinsically present.
Pardon?
Intrinsically present.
Intrinsically present. So in a sense, inherently there. It's just there. Don't need anything else for it to be there. Definitely don't need a mind that thinks I. In fact, there is a sense that the reason we think I, because there is an I, and not the other way around, that there's only an I because we label I, right? So it's there. It has always been there. It will always be there. Okay. And of course, that's true for everyone else. I perceive you to be to exist exactly that way. You have a self. You have that intrinsic I somewhere that I don't know, I can't see, but it's there. Yes, please?
The ability to observe, is it considered as part of the mind or something separate?
So when you observe your own I, you're saying when you
When I observe my mind.
when you observe your own mind.
There's like the observation and the mind. Is it like...
If you observe your own mind, so what is observing your own mind? That's your question, right? It's another mind. It's another mind, really. In actuality, when we say I observe my mind, well, what do we call I here? It's another mind. It's introspection that is observing. Oh, there's some people just arrived. I think they... Anyway, so, yes, basically we have a sense there's the separate I. And of course, all of you have that separate I, and it seems there's even, remember yesterday I talked about this cup versus this microphone. The very subtle building blocks of those two, there's no difference. The subatomic particles, whatever you want to call them. So on a very, very subtle level, that which makes up the building blocks, the things that make this microphone and this cup, they're not different. Therefore, there's a sense there must be something here, something when we look for what we call a microphone, we can find it, and that thing distinguishes it from the cup. So there's something intrinsic in this microphone that makes it a microphone, and there's something intrinsic within this cup that makes it a cup, a cupness, if you like. All right, we haven't discussed it much, but that's the basics. So what happens then? We all have this view, we were born with this view. In fact, we've had it since beginning this time, even if it's not in the nature of our mind. And that view then gives rise to my own mind, in the case of my own mind, of all the things I misperceive in that concrete and solid way in which they don't exist, the I, which my mind has been labeling I, so it perceives that concrete I now as a result of becoming aware of I, and then it perceives it as very concrete, and that is much closer to it than your eyes. You're over there, I'm over here. A natural sense, therefore, my I is more important. Here it's really because of proximity. Well, I mean, why don't I get attached to your I? My mind doesn't get attached to your mind, to your I. It gets attached to this I. Why is that? Because in terms of my mind being over here, in the sense of I being close to this, being part of this mind, if you like, or the mind being a part of this I, therefore, you're too far away. And thus, I perceive, that's the next step. Before even attachment sets in, I perceive that to be more important, more precious, more important. My happiness, that which is mine, to be more important, and my happiness in particular. And that then gives rise to craving, to this attachment to I and mine. First you have that exaggeration. You have that exaggeration, exaggerating the importance of the I, the importance of mine. And then the next step is the mind holds on to I and mine. That's important, that kind of... So attachment, it is true. Attachment, so self-centeredness is that type of attachment. That's the type of self-centeredness is that type of attachment. And none of the other two bother us as much. They're not as present. They're the root cause, I mean, especially that fundamental misconception of perceiving a concrete I and everything else, perceiving everything as inherently, intrinsically this, that, and the other. Then this exaggeration, that's also an issue, but the attachment, that's when all the trouble starts. The attachment to, based on that exaggeration, and even the attachment itself exaggerates, it does the same thing. It still exaggerates the importance of I and mine, in particular my happiness. And now that attachment, that emotion, it's a type of emotion, it now controls everything I do. I need, I want, I don't want, I hate that person. I like, you know, all this comes from there. So therefore, based on that root attachment to myself and to mine, called self-centeredness, sometimes self-cherishing, but honestly, I don't like the word self-cherishing as much, because we should cherish the self. There's one contemporary master from South India, Geshema Kelsang Wangmo. He, in one of his commentaries, he says, self-cherishing, actually, just as we should cherish others, we should cherish ourselves, but not at the exclusion of everyone else. And that's what our self-centeredness does. Therefore, I think the English word self-centeredness, although it doesn't really, the Tibetan word doesn't connote that, I mean, it doesn't really mean that, but it is, His Holiness has also often said it in Tibetan, like, you believe you're in the middle of everything. Kila, you're in the middle of everything, right? And it's like the center of the universe. That's just another way of saying. So self-centeredness is a good word. Some people go as far as saying self-obsession. That's also a good word. We're kind of obsessed with the self, with ourselves. Let's put it that way. Not what is the self, but rather with I. I'm obsessed with myself. And that's why I suffer. I can never truly enjoy anything, because there's always that impending, something could happen to the I, or haven't achieved something yet, my gain, my reputation, praise, success, all those things, material possessions, of course, and all that. So I, pleasure for the I. Therefore, that self-centeredness gives rise to all the other afflictions. It's now in relation to what you do to the I or not, that is either attachment, anger, or indifference. We have these three reactions. Honestly, have you ever walked into a room or be with a group of people and kind of go, like, don't care, like, don't care, right? We do that. Like, don't like. We have that automatic judgment in relation to what? Self-centeredness. It's in relation to what is good for me, what do I prefer, what do I not like, all around that. Then we judge other people. Don't care, don't benefit me, don't harm me, so I'm indifferent. Harms me, or I find annoying. I mean, they harm me because I find them annoying. So even if they don't do anything to harm us, have no intention, maybe just because the way they speak or the way they look or whatever, the way they dress, whatever it is that annoys us, I feel harmed by that, and therefore I don't like. And then there are those possibly few that I like. Right? Like, don't like. Therefore, we have three motions basically. Attachment, aversion, and then timuk, as in like ignorance. Is a type of ignorance. I guess you could kind of say like I don't care about them at all. I'm not going to think about them. I don't give them any attention in that sense. So to put it simply. So you have those three emotions basically. I don't care about them. I don't think about them. I'm not interested to get to know them and apply any kind of understanding here. Those are the three reactions. And it all comes down to that basic attachment, although it's not the root cause, but it's that which controls our life. And this is something like I've asked you to practice mindfulness. You never have the chance when you're on your own. So again, it's not just mindfulness, of course. It's 3 mental functions: introspection, attentiveness, and recollection, bringing the mind back to its object. But introspection, like your own mind, to get to know your self-centeredness without being disgusted, but just recognizing what we're up against. It's very natural we have it, especially in the 21st century, when sometimes it's called the century, the 20th and the 21st century are described as the centuries of the self. In no time before has there been so much emphasis on individualism, basically on the self. Now, I've shared this in other situations as well. I remember watching a documentary, which is, I think, called The Century of the Self. It's a 4-part documentary. It's very interesting. It talks about how, I think it was a nephew of Sigmund Freud. He realized that using the self can be very effective in advertisement, right? So if you advertise, you put the person, like, be different, drink Coca-Cola, be special, I don't know, wear Levi's jeans or whatever. I mean, like, the advertisement, it started around that time. So with modern psychology really taking off, understanding human psyche better. I mean, communism failed because the individual didn't really get enough, what's the word, profit. So if the whole profit just goes into the community, you can do it for some time, but sooner or later that collapses. Even the kibbutzim no longer work on that principle, right? In the kibbutzim, like when after I left high school, the first place I went to was Israel, and I was in a kibbutz called Alumot. I've been told now it's kind of a spa now, but it was very much like very kind of communist ideas in a beautiful way. Everyone works for the community. You get a little bit of money, I guess. Even the clothes we wore when we were working, blue colored, blue, what do you call it? Blue collar kind of. So all blue, this kind of working blue colors, and they were all put in the laundry, and then there were certain sizes, and whenever the laundry was ready, you picked your size and you put it on, right? Yeah, like monks and nuns' clothes. Yeah, exactly. Except we didn't have to shave our heads, and then we had to pick up melons. In the summer, that was hot. But yeah, anyway, but everyone cooked, everyone got together. It was a really nice community. But I've been told it doesn't exist like that any longer. So sooner or later, it's the century of the self. So communism is not working. I mean, China is still talking about being a communist country, but it isn't at all. I mean, therefore, at this time and age, it's even harder. It's even more difficult to understand selflessness because, of course, there's so much emphasis on the self.
Yeah. Just a small thing about the kibbutzes is that some people really got damaged from this too.
Oh yeah.
From the, living in not with your parents.
That's true. I've heard that. Yeah, having to be in these children. Yeah. Okay. But that has nothing to do with that's just an extra thing. So they made this, the idea was really nice, but you don't separate children from their parents. That maybe wasn't such a good idea. They should have kept the children, yeah.
That was part of the idea.
Yeah, that was part of the idea. Yeah, that, I guess, it was a lovely idea, but it's not realistic. Even with Tibetans, Tibetans, many children, they put in monasteries, and it's not easy. They're separated from their parents. I don't know whether that's always, they do get incredible support from the monks or the nuns, but I'm not sure it's that ideal. I remember Jetsun Pema, His Holiness's sister. Of course, I should also add, not just the children who go into the monasteries, they enter the monasteries when they're still quite young, but it's also the refugee children that were sent over by their parents over the Himalayas. Now, this is not happening nowadays as much because the Chinese, they have these They have these what do you call them? Pardon? Drones? Oh, drones as well. But I think even before they had the drones, they have these machines, like you walk past them and you're shot.
Motion sensors.
Like a self-shooting machine, basically. Like, I don't know what else to call it. So in the past, they had guards. And if they missed someone crossing the border illegally, okay. But now they have all this gadgets, these technological gadgets that when you pass a certain point, you get shot automatically by some automatic gun. I don't even know what it's called. I can only think of the German word right now. Anyway, so that is okay. And then drones, that's probably a more recent thing that, yeah, they observe everything and they can see everywhere. So children no longer come over, but when they used to come, their parents didn't leave Tibet. I mean, oftentimes they had to support their children financially. Being in exile, that was very difficult. So they sent their children either themselves to the border as far as they could go and then send them off with a group of people going, taking, like guards taking them, or guides taking them to, not guards, guides taking them to the other side, or they sent them off with a relative. Many, many children, many of my classmates actually came in that way. Their parents were still in Tibet and they came over. And that's traumatizing. I mean, my classmates, they were like 15, 16, so it was okay. I mean, when they came over and then when they became my classmates, they were older. But the point is that a lot of children suffer from that. And Jetsuma actually said that many of these schools, yeah, there's definitely, if the adults there weren't able to really provide like a home-like, and they tried to, but it wasn't always possible when there were too many children. And that happened in the kibbutz as well. But I still think it's that's slightly different. I think this idea of the self, I'm saying, like, especially nowadays, it's so much harder in the West. It's everyone for themselves. It's not just the West. Of course, in India, in Asia, it's also changing, but not as rapidly. I think there's still a lot of, and I could be wrong, please, you're the guys who know that, but the emphasis on family and looking after, like your community, I think is still quite strong. Whereas in the West, unfortunately, I mean, so many people in old people's homes and children, siblings having no contact with one another, that's pretty common, actually. Yes, you wanted to add something? Yeah, no. Okay, yes.
In the Arab communities, they are still being all the family together. And like community of Christian Arabs, so they live together, and I know.
Yes, I believe that. I mean, I also know, like in Hindu communities, in some communities, the whole family lives under one roof. Right? I mean, you have sometimes they have like a whole building, grandparents, and then the uncle, like everyone, where every brother has like their own, usually it's the brothers living at home, and the sisters, they're married somewhere else. They're part of a new household, right? Traditionally, but not necessarily. Yeah, there's a lot more of that. Orthodox Jews as well. Yeah, they have a very strong community sense. So it's not all... Pardon? Yeah, that's the old tradition. Yes, you wanted to ask something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember learning this probably 5 or 6 years ago, that in a lot of languages, there isn't even a term for a retirement home. In America, retirement homes, right, are a multi-billion-dollar industry. And it's so sad that we ship our grandparents off once they become difficult,
Yeah.
go live in these homes more isolated.
Right.
And in many other languages, there's no word for that. Right? So you have a translation, like there's no concept, because of course, you took care of your kid, your parents took care of you when you were younger. Once they're older,
Yeah.
you take care of them.
Yeah.
I remember like really reflecting a lot on, wow, there's no word to describe this multi-billion-dollar industry, at least in America. I think it's probably, sure it's the biggest there, where we basically, hey, now this is your problem, all the old people and their challenges and everything else. And it's really disheartening, and it's a good thing I think to reflect on. But
this is really, I mean, this is such a big problem. But it's not just that. I take it further because, again, talking to Indians, it's not an issue. I mean, what did I see just the other day? There was a motorbike, it was parked there at least 2 days, and it says, "Mommy, my queen." It's like a sticker, "Mommy, my queen of my hearts," or something. which German person would put the sticker on the motorbike, Mommy, my queen of heart? Or there's a song as a Tibetan singer, very famous Tibetan singer, who sings, oh, my mother, your beautiful face. I'm thinking, this is such a popular song, or used to be. It's an older song, but still, you can still listen to it. It's really, and this guy is like this toughie, you know, like he's this tough Tibetan guy, all leather, long hair, motorbike through the hills of Tibet, right? With like some prayer flags and stuff. So, and he sings this song for our mother. This is a very important, so in the West, I believe, and I see this as a huge problem, is that we took Sigmund Freud to an extreme, right? All our problems blamed on our parents. Like it's a good idea to reflect on our problems. This may be, I don't know how familiar you guys are with this, but even when I was a kid, and that's a long time ago, when I was a kid, it was so common to blame your parents for everything. My sister still does. Totally. It's all my parents' fault. Everything bad in her life is my parents' fault. Everything good, she did. Very convenient. So the thing is, there's this movement. I don't know when it started, probably after the Second World War. Like we look for causes of our problems, good, very good. But we don't look at our own mind. There's no emphasis on that or on actions in the past. No. It's our parents. It's our parents. And none of it actually makes sense. In the sense that there's two arguments, I believe. But it's really powerful. I don't know whether you agree, but where I grew up, it's very strong. I hate my mom. I hate my dad. You know, when like as teenagers, I hate my parents. It was pretty common. It was cool to hate your parents. It was actually, it's almost like a cool thing, like, oh, they're so old-fashioned, they don't understand anything. There was that. So it started off with that, but then also blaming them for everything. But it doesn't make any sense. The logic, the problem with the logic is this. First of all, if all the bad stuff comes from our parents, the good stuff does too. So why do we obsess over the bad stuff, but never give any thought to the good stuff? That's one thing. Right? We obsess over just the negative things, although we can't change it. I mean, we're obsessing about something you can't change in the first place. You can change now, but you can't change the past. So that blame game doesn't help. Plus, the positive things are never mentioned. It's almost like, no, the positive I worked hard to achieve. And the second is, well, actually, we should blame our grandparents because they messed up our parents. Oh, but wait a minute. But our grandparents were messed up by our great-great-parents. So there's an endless regress. Right? Of course they've made mistakes. The good thing is usually people soften a little bit when they have children themselves and realize it's not as easy as it seems. When my sister had her own children, all right. And she tries to not make the same mistake as my mom, but of course she learned from my mom. And she does the same thing all over again. So the point is, what I'm trying to say is this alienation between our parents has really taken root. Parents still love their children the same way. I don't think there's a difference in the modern world. But as exactly this alienation, like you don't want to look after your parents. You said it. I mean, they looked after us when we were the most helpless. And now it's our turn. And we just send them off. Sometimes, of course, if you have little kids yourself and you have to take care of all of them, but it's not always like that. And even then, people don't visit their parents. And I think psychologically, it's very, very difficult. It's very, very difficult for us as well. Psychologically, it's very damaging, not just for the parents, but also for the students. And in Buddhism, when we talk about compassion, so going back to compassion, we try to develop compassion, but what is the first step? How can we develop compassion towards sentient beings? We can only do that if we develop closeness. That's the first step. Closeness. A closeness. If you don't feel close to someone, you can't have compassion for them. So a feeling of closeness is a must. How do you develop that? How do you develop a feeling of closeness? It's really, really hard. Who do we feel close to? Ourselves. There's no problem with that. We feel very close to ourselves. Our mind, in other words. When we say we, I'm saying our mind feels very close to the I. Okay, that's why it's attached already in the first place. But we don't have that sense of closeness towards others unless they're beneficial from the perspective of our attachment to I and mine. Then there is. But that's another type of attachment. And it's not the type of closeness we want. There's a difference between closeness. One type of closeness is because I want the other person to be happy, and the other type is I want them to make me happy. That's attachment, right? Versus the other type, a feeling of closeness because of a feeling of care, wanting them to be happy, a type of affection. The second type we want to develop, not attachment. How do we do that? How do we do that when we have a natural sense, not only do I exist inherently here as an I, and you have your inherent I's that have nothing to do with the mind or anything, there's also, you are inherently different from me. So it's not only you're just different, but you're inherently. That sense of like a total difference between us, that creates a greater separation than there actually is. And because, especially in the 20th and 21st century, the century of the self, this distance has grown. And guess why? Guess what? There's one new emotion that a lot of people suffer from. What is that? A lot of people in the 21st century suffer from a very unpleasant emotion. It's not fear. It's not fear. Loneliness. Anxiety is also true, but more directly related to this sense of distance, it's loneliness. We feel like I'm over here and they're over there and they're so happy and they don't make me happy. Kind of like, yeah, it's this loneliness. It's this incredible loneliness. And I think this has become stronger in this century than it used to be in the past. Because, well, we created more distance between each other. People live no longer in these communities, can no longer live in these communities, and therefore actually create a physical isolation. But of course, the worst part of that is their mental isolation. The physical is not the problem. We have lots of meditators up in the cave somewhere. They're physically secluded, they're physically isolated, and they don't feel lonely. I mean, whether with people or without people, there's that feeling of closeness. If you have a feeling of closeness towards others, guess what? When they're happy, you're happy. Right? There's no envy. For instance, if my mind feels happy, then there's another mind rejoicing because there's a sense of closeness. If I'm happy, I rejoice in my own happiness. It's not the same mind. There's the happy mind and then another mind that rejoices in the happiness because there's a sense of closeness. But when your mind is happy, I don't rejoice because there's a sense of distance. It's got nothing to do with me. Right? So you can be as happy as it gets. It may even make me more unhappy that you're happy and I'm not part of it, which I think I'm not part of. That's also just a creation of my own mind. So we create these bubbles, this distance between us, and your happiness, I don't rejoice in your happiness. I may even rejoice in your failure. That's how far we got. We rejoice in the failure of other people because it makes us feel better. So of course, this is so unrealistic. It's based on a view of reality that is totally skewed. That's not reality in the first place. It's unrealistic. We are interconnected. So strongly interconnected that your happiness is important for mine. You remember in the very beginning I said, let's say everyone other than me, all forms of life, whether animal, insects, or humans, suddenly get violently sick and can no longer move. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? If everyone around me is happy and peaceful, then this is going to affect me. I don't live in a bubble. Right? Just something we can all accept on the coarsest level. But our sense is usually distance. And in the time and age we live right now, that distance has been, I mean, there's an innate sense of his distance, but it's not as great as the ones that has now been added. In Tibetan, the word is usually, it's intellectually acquired. So it's not just the innate sense, but intellectually acquired means basically from the way we grew up, from watching others, from watching commercials, from being influenced by the world we live in, we've now acquired a stronger sense of self than we previously had. A stronger sense, I'm here against the rest of the world. And we suffer more. Anxiety is another one. There's a lot of anxiety because I feel I have to be successful, for instance. It's not like everyone's success is also my success, so it takes off some of the pressure, only when people play football. Soccer, I should call it soccer. Football, not the real football is soccer. No, I'm kidding. Are you American? Yeah.
Yeah.
Glad you didn't say you were Canadian.
I play soccer in Europe, though, so I say football.
Oh, right, you say football. Okay, all right, I use football. All right, so then that's like, wow, you can rejoice for your team and the whole country rejoices. But that's only, it's funny, it's only then, right? The rest of the time is like my success. I'm alone and I can only rejoice about my own success. We have so little joy. And this is also something I really learned from the Tibetans, being with Tibetans. And again, things are definitely changing. But when I was with my classmates, there wasn't that sense of, I mean, they were competitive. Yes, they were competitive with each other, definitely, but not envious. So on the debate ground, you know, someone made a really good point. You also wanted to make a really good point. But it wasn't about, I don't like the other person to do well at all. So they were competitive, but not envious. There was no envy. In fact, they were really happy for each other. If another person did well, one example I've given many times, not here, but on other occasions, about one classmate who really wanted to go to university, but it didn't work out. Somehow he couldn't make it, didn't have the right degree. He didn't have a high school degree. He became a monk when he was quite little. But then some other person got to go, and he was so happy for them. Oh, they got to go. How lovely. And guess what? Many of my classmates were much happier than many of us in the West, for instance. And when I say the West, I can only say where I come from. That doesn't apply to everyone. But rejoicing in each other. Rejoicing, like being so happy for everyone else. And you know, it's so funny because for a few years, the institute I studied in was connected to Emory University, is still connected to Emory University. So every year they would have students come over and do like a semester studying philosophy, studying about Tibetan culture. In fact, some of the mindfulness programs were actually founded by a professor now at Emory, was previously a monk at the IBD, and then he went to the States and he became part of Emory, Geshe. Anyway, so there's this particular connection, and for a while, for about 11 years, I taught the philosophy class when these groups came, and they had to write papers, as they do in university. Then I usually had a TA. I really needed that help. I was not familiar with the A+, and so forth system, so I had to first learn about it, the grading system. But she was very helpful. She helped me a lot. And so basically they had to write papers. They learned about philosophy, and so the way they were used in school. And I remember, or in university, so I remember one time they did an incredible job. All of them did really well. They wrote incredible papers. And we had to grade them. And the worst grade, I think, was a B. And that's not a bad grade at all. So then the TA gave them these tiny pieces of paper, tiny little pieces with their personal grades. And I was thinking, oh, it could be that bit bigger. Why not just put a sheet and then everyone can read it? And I asked the TA, and she's like, no, you can't do that. They're so competitive with each other. You can't, I mean, they're going to get depressed if someone does better than them, so keep it secret. And then I made a huge mistake. I said to them, you guys, you did so well. It was so amazing. Great job. The worst grade was a B. And the TA goes, no, don't say, oh, too late. So previously, everyone was so happy looking at their piece of paper, and suddenly, you know, all those who didn't have an A or an A+, at that time we were allowed to give A+, and there was one, I think, they were like, oh. And then after class, they were like, they're all queuing up. What can I do to get better? Because in comparison, and I was like, oh no, oh no. And there you have the Tibetans. Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, all right. So there's the Tibetans. And you know what the Tibetans are trying to do right now? They're so not competitive, usually, that they now founded a system where in the monastic, everywhere, that didn't exist in Tibet at all. In fact, they didn't used to take exams the way they do now. It didn't exist. It was just by the merit of that person. They, you know, they did well or not. It was judged in that way, but there weren't formal exams, as far as I understand. It was like this like when you get up and you debate in front of everyone, but you know, who's going to grade it? No one is. So therefore, Tibetan society having to adjust, and they realized, well, we're not doing well enough. They found it this really competitive way. So now everyone's results are announced outside on a board. And then they have a celebration where number 3 and number 2 and number 1, you know, you clap hands for number 3 and they get a gift and everyone knows, to get them more competitive. And you have that reverse, right? And they're still, oh, I rejoice in number 2 and number 3, how wonderful. So they do work hard. If they have the motivation to benefit a lot of people, they work even harder. If they have that compassion, it really gets them working. But if that's not strong enough and they don't have some natural competitiveness, they're not going to do as much as they could. So Tibetans try to foster that. But you see, in the West, we're in many ways the opposite. And that was like, when did I start doing that? 2006 to 2005 to 2016 I took them. So for all these years, and at the IBD, we were clapping away. And for the Emerald students, there were these tiny pieces of paper you could hardly read. Did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, so I don't know if everyone's been to Leh Ladakh. It's kind of similar, more similar to like Old Tibet, very different from the rest of India. And I played soccer with like the best soccer group in all of Ladakh. They don't have a professional football league yet.
Okay.
This is going to be like that group. And the selflessness of the players, like everyone just wanted to pass the ball. I had never seen, and like, you know, if they bumped into someone, oh, I'm so sorry. And like, especially European American soccer is so aggressive, and they were good. But I'd never seen teams play like this, and just the selflessness of giving, the lack of like this innate raw aggressive competitive energy that is just omnipresent in American sports. It was so beautiful to see because there's such a tenderness to the Ladakhi people, and I imagine very similar to the Tibetan people.
Yeah.
That was so incredible to just experience.
Yeah.
And I think it's really beautiful.
That's a beautiful example. I never thought about playing football. I've never even witnessed Tibetans playing football, but that makes so much sense that they would not, you know, like what they do in Europe, they do these nasty things, like they trip, but it was their own fault, and then they pretend they're like hurt by this person, so the other person gets, you know, sent off the court or something. It's so fake and terrible. Yeah, that's such a good point. Wow, yeah, because the competitiveness, of course, there's incredible money involved in the West. That is definitely a motivating factor, but, you know, everything goes kind of thing. And Tibetans I mean, honestly, I don't even call Ladakhis and Zanskaris, I don't call them not Tibetans because they are Tibetans. Politically, they're no longer Tibetans, but this used to be a part of Tibet. It was in the 18th century that it became part of India, but ethnically and culturally, they're totally Tibetans. I still call them that. And so, yeah, it's true for all of them. Yeah, it would be it would be considered a really nasty player if they didn't do that. And guess what? They're so much happier. That's the thing. That's what counts. Right? If you're like constantly in that competition with one another and they scored a goal but you didn't, oh gosh, and you can't bear it, how much unhappiness, playing football goes along with that. So we are basically sacrificing a lot of our happiness because we can't be happy for someone else. Wouldn't that be lovely to learn to be happy for everyone? And it's very simply it's not that difficult to do. And I know this from Lama Zopa Rinpoche. We got a sense, and this is true for a lot of the meditations, there are a lot of meditations, unless you do some analysis, it's very difficult to generate that particular emotion. But I remember years ago, I told you when I said Lama Zopa Rinpoche doesn't sleep? When I told you he doesn't sleep? That same night, when he basically gave that teaching the whole night and started running around the next day and wasn't tired at all. And the same night, during a puja, he did a meditation with everyone. And he basically, I sat in the front as a monastic with other monastics, and in the back there was like a chorus of lots of people. And Rinpoche, just as he happened to be there, they came to the puja, and he said, rejoice, just rejoice in the success of all the Buddhas. That's easy, like who's envious of a Buddha? So, whatever understanding they had of Buddha, they were like rejoicing, rejoicing, rejoicing. So within that rejoicing, in that cloud of rejoicing, you're just rejoicing, you're so happy. So first you start off with people you don't care about, you find inspirational, you don't care about, like you don't envy them. So you're rejoicing, rejoicing. All these great beings in this world, and Mother Teresa and what have you, all these great beings, you rejoice, rejoice. And then he just expanded it towards others, people you don't know, and slowly the ones you don't like, the ones you're envious about. And you couldn't stop, you were in that cloud you were in that mode of rejoicing. And I was wondering, how do the people behind, how did they? So I kind of took looked behind me to see all these Westerners. And they were all having these huge smiles on their faces. And I was like, wow, it's so easy to rejoice. It's really not that hard. Yeah.
Yeah, but it is very much learned behavior, isn't it? What we see even in Indian society now,
Yes.
competitiveness.
Yeah.
There was an example in one of the Olympics where there was the all-American male football, I think it was throwball or basketball team, and the women.
Yep.
And they were the best stars they took. But they were so individual, they wouldn't throw the ball to each other to make the good. Whereas the women, because they worked as a team, they won. So, even among gender, there are these cultural differences.
Right.
But it really is learned. If we could learn.
Yeah, it's learned. That's the good news. It is learned. So it can be unlearned.
But if we see the benefit,
Yeah.
if you
Yeah,
promote
exactly.
competitiveness as
Yeah.
what is needed to get
Yeah.
ahead and to be successful,
Yeah.
but you don't see the benefit by cooperating,
No.
then it's not going to fly.
No, and this is why His Holiness is such a visionary. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, when he said, we need to teach this in school. You have to start at the basics. You need to bring this into schools. And I've been told, I don't know whether that's true. Can it be like 100,000 schools in India have already taken that on? Sea learning is
Yes, really started.
in 100,000 schools?
I don't know how many.
Someone said it was 100,000. That seems a lot. But yeah, apparently it's really taken off in India more than in any other country.
I see.
Yeah, I've been told. In the Ukraine it also took off, but unfortunately it's not doing too well right now. But yes, in India it's really taken off. So yes, to understand, you see, the only reason we are so competitive and we do what we do and we don't rejoice in others because we think being number one is going to give us happiness. Getting all that money, getting all that fame is going to make us happy. When in actuality, it doesn't make us happy. It isolates us more, and that real happiness from rejoicing, we're missing out on that. We're really missing out on that. Yeah? And we can all learn it. But that's what we're here for, to hopefully maybe undo some of those. All right, anyway, enjoy lunch. And keep that mindfulness going. Yeah, I'm still keep you with the mindfulness. So still there's silence, also if I talk. There's still silence, if you can keep the silence and just continue with whatever you've learned, apply mindfulness to that. But again, looking inwards, the best way to learn. All right, see you soon.